¿No oye la ambulancia? Tranquila.
¿Te llamas? Que lo sepa todo el mundo. ¿Cómo te llamas?
Jennifer.
Medeiros, hace nada que os ha cumplido. ¿A lo que ves?
¡Deja de acercarse al edificio!
In the autumn of 2007 in Barcelona, Spain, an unknown threat besieged the occupants of an apartment building in the iconic city's Gothic quarter. The residents, emergency workers, and news station employees losing their minds to become beastly and feral entities. The world outside the complex was wholly unaware of the nightmares occurring within. Government officials were quick to barricade it to make sure whatever it was inside would never see the light of day. Was it biological warfare? Godless cultists executing innocent believers? An unknown pathogen spreading like wildfire? Demonic possession ramping up in victims? We were never meant to know. What happened that warm summer night is lost to history, except for the recovered footage from a television reporter and her cameraman who just happened to be there in an ill fate of wrong place at the wrong time. While the narrative is always easily malleable dependent on how much information we have and retain, one cannot shy away from the cold, hard evidence of proof. But even with videographic records, one can still come up with their own conclusions to the atrocities that happened in Barcelona, as today we are discussing the Barcelona apartment zombie attack cover-up. It was a night like any other for reporter Ángela Vidal, looking to film her next piece for a segment called While You're Sleeping for a local Barcelona news station. This particular segment would cover the night shift for the BFD. No, we're not talking about a big effing deal, but the Barcelona Fire Department, to see what it was like for firefighters to work into the darkness of night, the witching hour, and the wee hours of the morning, following their lives around the fire station, wearing what they wear, viewing their dining hall, setting them up to properly record them in case they are called out for an emergency, showing their sleeping quarters, and the 3-minute response time in interviewing them about their nightly lives pertaining to most calls to non-fire outings like water main fixes and animal rescues. Ángela was hoping they would be called to a fire to make for a grander spectacle for her viewers and, more importantly, her ratings. But this wish would be won from the monkey's paw. During a pickup game of basketball at the fire department, the sirens finally sound off with the intercom declaring that a person is trapped in an apartment needing their rescue services. The media crew struggle to keep up with them as they rush into fire trucks. Ángela asks them why they don't use the alarm, not siren, on the truck since they were called. The firefighters state that this is not a call to a fire and that it did not necessarily mandate the siren to disturb the peace and to rush through downtown. A precursor to how swift what was about to happen to them would all be so much more surprising, and how Ángela would make sure that she wanted to have more spectacle than anything, that this incident was no cause for literal alarm despite police already being on the scene. The firefighters of Alex and Manu procure tools mainly for the use of unlocking doors and windows as the group make their way in to see multiple concerned neighbors discussing the screams of an elderly woman in her apartment. A blood-curdling yell that could have been anything. It could have been a break-in, or she may be having a medical emergency. No one in the complex knew much about her. She had always lived alone and acted strangely towards anyone. A loner that always stayed locked inside her home, only scantily coming out to get supplies. Her only company being that of multiple house cats. The mystery surrounding this solitary old woman suddenly causing such a ruckus has every neighbor out in the halls, staring up the stairwells in a reverse Vertigo-esque scene to spectate the crossover of firefighters, police, and even local news, in which a police officer states to both the firemen and the media that the recording of the upcoming situation must abide by his orders, as to not complicate things, cause legal issues, or interfere with official police investigations and, more importantly, criminal justice. While the firefighters and police work to pick the lock on her door, Ángela immediately begins reporting in front of them, ignoring ignoring what's going on to focus on her career, only to be startled by reality when they have to bash the door open violently to get in, a precursor to the events that would unfold throughout the night and how she would react. When inside, they immediately find the woman, named Conchita, standing in a dazed and jittery state, unresponsive to their calls at the end of the hallway, as if haunting the abode, unable to move on her feet, yet with her head twisting and her arms jolting, like she isn't in control, but is still holding back. Every official calls out to her, with the police telling them to shut their camera off, as this may be a touchy situation. Ignoring their warnings of recording, the group draws near to see her covered in blood. The closer they approach, the more erratic her movements become, like a scared and cornered animal succumbing to symptoms of rabies. That is when the blinding light of the camera suddenly turns on, illuminating everyone there, throwing off the blanket of darkness to reveal her as she gasps in fear. Instantly apparent is her photophobia. The sudden light in the eyes would kind of freak out anybody, but the moment that the light hits her retina, she screams, she yelps, she gives out this not just startled, but full-on terror. While it's possibly known what is already transpiring, it's important to take in the context clues of this particular patient zero's symptoms. The frantic and shaky behavior lends well into the theory of rabies, coupled with her solitary lifestyle, with tons of cats possibly going in and out to the streets to possibly contract rabies. In humans, rabies can cause ocular manifestations, including transient visual limitations, blurred vision, and photophobia, sensitivity to light and sound that is a part of the autonomic dysfunction seen in advanced rabies. Her outward symptoms spelled all of this to those that could see it for what it was, but the media team's thirst for a story was oblivious to these telltale signs. They wanted that story, but it was all too little, too late. The second that light hit, it sparked the powder keg of events that would consume the building that night. While the police and firefighters were all looking away to tell Angela and Pablo to turn the light off like a child being face to eyes with the Tyrannosaurus Rex, the disoriented Conchita saw an opportunity while the officer was distracted and sunk her teeth into his neck, flesh being ripped out as blood spewed everywhere. The firefighters and police struggled to get her off of him to no avail. All this while the news crew are making damn sure the camera not only remained on, but were recording the carnage frame by frame, but screaming about what to do. The ones that inadvertently shrugged off warnings from police and started this are now just acting like victimized spectators. Forcing Conchita off of him, they leave her be to rush the officer out of the apartment building as he is losing blood fast. Now that they are in immediate danger and the policeman is being carried out, Angela reinforces how much her cameraman needs to prioritize getting all this shot no matter what. Ironically, despite them being a partial cause of what just transpired and being the least help possible in these situations, they would be the only record of what occurred within the walls of this soon-to-be tomb. With a massive chunk of flesh missing from his neck, their rescue operation begins to flicker, just like the lights of the building that temporarily go out as sirens grow louder outside. Almost deafeningly, the apartment residents from earlier on the first floor stop them in their rescue efforts and inform the rescue operators that those on the outside have barricaded them off from leaving the apartment complex. Struggling to keep the officer alive with the compress on the neck, the Barcelona police on the outside say over loudspeaker that Barcelona health officials have ordered an immediate quarantine of the entire building. No one, even the critically injured officer, are allowed to leave whatsoever until they receive further instructions. Not even the uninjured cop can get or give clear answers. He is speaking on a walkie-talkie, but no one will get back to him. Just like the people on the inside, he is also unwillingly in the dark on what was going to happen. The most urgent matter was getting his fellow officer urgent care, as a resident says he will die of blood loss at any moment if he does not receive care. Stressed beyond belief, the officer sees the camera practically shoved in his face, causing him to be fed up, shoving the camera and yelling for it to be shut off. Literally the meme of Randy Marsh in South Park running around with a camera while everyone else is scared to death over their chances of survival. Angela escalates this and once again shows prioritization towards her footage, her story. While a man is laying, dying, she jumps in and defends the equipment, stating, above all else, how important it is for them to record what's going on, to make sure there is a record of the night, which there's nothing wrong with that, but it turns everyone against the officer for him demanding the tape to be shut off, redirecting his commands to say that he has more important issues to deal with than some newfangled camera, that he needs to worry about what's going on. Nearby parents agree, with the mother demanding to keep the camera rolling and the dad telling the officer to figure out what's going on, with his fellow police officers that have shut off the building. Angela's motives cause more strife and emotions to flare. She was wanting media gold, and this would skyrocket her career. She would rather have everyone at the officer's throat than that of her and Pablo's, despite them exacerbating every single situation so far with the camera. One of the firemen, having enough bickering, screeches at them to stop so they can find a way out. It made more sense to try to figure out an answer than pointing fingers, pointing at a shutter door behind them that is supposedly connected to a textile workshop as a possible means of escape. Not much leeway is made in opening it when tensions flare even more. A mother holding her young daughter says that her husband was going out to get antibiotics for her daughter's infection before all this went down, adding more tension to this happening. As people were bickering, the chatter is suddenly silenced for a moment by the rapidly moving scream and loud, thunderous boom of one of the firemen falling down the stairwell multiple stories to his death. Alex's head basically splattered onto the ground with barely a pulse as what sounds like the shrieking of a banshee echoing from the floors above. The policeman and firefighter looking to aid those upstairs as the policeman forcefully shuts the camera off, rushing into the fray but not wanting to be hindered by spectators with their hands full of cameras and microphones. Temporarily offline, Angela says she will continue despite the directions as her and Pablo slowly follow them to chronicle the events. Hearing noises in one apartment, they decide to sleuth their way up. Pablo advances despite Angela's pleas to stop. Suddenly, an injured girl comes sprinting in, screaming bloody murder, slamming into each wall, panicking, afraid for her life, until she collapses to the floor, with a noticeable large bite out of her right arm. The scene draws the attention of the last officer and firefighter, having to ignore the woman in peril that fell to the ground to ask yet again what the news crew are even doing in the area. The distraction offers little in deterrence for the girl's safety, as she is immediately declared dead on sight. Conchita can be heard grumbling at the end of the hallway, breathing heavily, standing in place with arms shaking, almost as if she is ready to give chase at a moment's notice, akin to a rage infected from 28 Days Later or common infected in Left 4 Dead. This scene here reminiscent of when Dawn stared down Andy in the tunnels of London, as if parts of the brain are trying to stop the body from acting on pure violence, holding back urges until a trigger sets them off to attack, losing all control. Conchita mimics another action from that of the fat lady zombie in Dawn of the Dead 2004, right down to the same stature, clothes, blood, and full sprint. As she barrels down the hallway, her screams echo the stuff of nightmares as the officer is forced to fire multiple rounds into her body. Falling over dead, Conchita lies motionless. Her face is pale white, her mouth agape. A life was just extinguished in a flash. The officer is in shock, feeling guilty for having to pull the trigger, trying to find solace in speaking with the fireman, reasoning with him that it had to be done, considering her mindless assault and the previous dead woman at their feet. This wasn't an action or horror movie where gunning down an assailant is brushed off in moments. The after effects reverberated in the policeman's mind, unable to handle murdering a person, even though they were basically no longer a person. All this to the shock of Angela, who can only sit back and watch them in their very real struggle at coming to terms with the attack. The officer, shaken, looks to go downstairs, only to be met with the infernal recording device facing him, knowing not only did he commit murder for the first time, but it was now recorded to possibly be seen again and again by him, his friends, family, and the general public, causing him to lash out at Pablo to be stopped by the firefighter who tells him to keep moving, but still giving a piercing glare. Being mere spectators to it all does not stop these two from making things worse. The emergency responders leave them with the victims as Angela quickly asks to see how the recording turned out, barking at Pablo to let her rewind and watch through it. Even though she just went through this traumatic experience, she has already suppressed it in her mind to ensure that she got what she came here for. No matter what, she was looking for a story, and a big one at that. The camera continued to roll as the firefighter and apartment residents elected to ignore protocol of staying in the hallway to go into the textile shop, only to see it too has been sealed off. The outside officials state that a health inspector enacting a BNC protocol would be sent in to assess the ongoing situation. BNC standing for biological, nuclear, and chemical threat situation. With the young girl suffering from tonsillitis and a rising fever, 2 dying officers, and 2 residents lying dead on the floor, the need to leave is higher than ever. However, it is discovered that cellular service, television, and radios have all been disconnected, ensuring communication in and out of the building is impossible. To get out, they procure an office key and plan to get into the nearby office upstairs to jump down into the patio below and escape. However, they must have been oblivious to the fact that every possible exit was either sealed or heavily guarded. Reinforcing this idea when they see tons of hazmat crew members and heavily armed police officers staring right back at them through the window. Trapped like insects, the building is blanketed in a giant tarp. The severity sets in while the officer storms into the room, ordering everyone to go back downstairs until he sees the tarp boarding them in. He, as a police officer, expected different treatment from the other civilians and even firefighters, not to be confined in this holding cell with other common folk. Frustrated at this development, he again attempts to grab the camera as everyone starts to defend the news team, saying that all of this would most likely be buried, so having video evidence would prove to be beneficial to them in some capacity, alive or dead. The firefighter even saying that those out there do not care for the police officer's safety like he had always assumed. The officer, alone and with no support, pulls out his gun and points it at everyone in the room. Having been denied the destruction of the camera as a way to vent his anger and fears, and furthermore, having the news crew he hated having support shift to them makes him turn violent. However, the announcement of a safety inspector soon entering the building eases pressures for now. Instructed to head back to the hallway, they gather supplies for the long haul, while Angela directly reports to the camera detailing everything that has happened so far, giving interviews to a medical intern who administers first aid to the critical first responders, barely hanging on to life, asking everyone that she can see's perspective and what stuck out the most for them so far in the night. The elderly argue over the terminology of the BNC being anything nuclear related, as many old folks would do. An Asian family, more so the mother, says she witnessed a man fall from above, focusing on the most horrific sight seen by the downstairs residents. The young girl, Jennifer, speaking about her illness and missing her dog, who is also apparently sick and being held at the vet. During these times of all, she is worried about her pet more than anything, and a middle-aged woman saying that there are dangers up above, knowing something like this would happen and that going into her own home was out of the question due to the unknown horrors occurring upstairs outside their knowledge, saying the experience was going to be grounds for her to sue and for her to spread her news into newspapers and local news stations. She was almost excited that she had the opportunity to do all of this. And then we have this older dude that quickly defaults to blaming the Chinese for whatever very apparent virus this is, attributing the Chinese family to them eating raw meat and their open door policy in their own apartment, complaining that they speak their own language of it's either Chinese or Japanese, but it's a pretty common occurrence, especially in today's political climate, immediately defaulting to blaming a certain group and generalizing some of their cultural practices, and mostly saying that speaking Chinese or Japanese was pretty suspicious considering they're in Barcelona. Outward racism that he sees no issue in, even not knowing he was being recorded when he made these statements and not being afraid of his words, just worried that his sweaty face would be recorded, caring more about looking good than making sweeping statements about other groups of people. The interviews with each of the apartment neighbors really shines a light on how people would react to a quarantine event of this nature. The old bickering over semantics, a foreign family still reeling from what they saw and what it could possibly mean. The young being blissfully unaware of what's going on and focusing on other small things. The middle-aged woman focused on how she can make it a payday for herself by making someone else pay for her displeasures. And an older man already laying blame on those he only knows preconceived notions of. Regardless of their reactions, or lack of, the officer has them congregate in the hallway to inform them of the health inspector that will be showing up over notions of an infection that is spreading in the building. This is news to the unaware, and well, duh to the others. The procedure for getting them out of quarantine will involve them each giving blood samples to ensure everyone is infection-free. Angela asks if she has to participate in these blood samples as well, as if her being in the quarantine but not a resident excluded her from this biological test. She actively still puts herself in the passenger seat as some kind of narrator, even with a biological nightmare unfolding right next to her and an unknown infection spreading like wildfire. She has one illness though, and it was main character syndrome. To make things easier, the officer begins a roll call of everyone there to see who is with them and who is unaccounted for. Each floor gets an even roll call until the Chinese family states that they have 4, with one not present, being the woman's father, who is bedridden due to being sick and basically paralyzed. While this would usually cause others to be concerned for an elderly man's well-being, since he would basically be a sitting duck to anyone else that may attack upstairs, the elderly instead put probable blame on that man himself, saying that his condition must be the root cause of all of the disease and therefore the building shut down, that his illness is their patient zero and it's the family's fault for their predicament, blaming foreigners, that which they do not know as an easy answer. No concern for their well-being, just laying blame again for different individuals. A part of being human, naturally, is seeing people point fingers rather than trying to solve problems. The officer tries to deter this potential situation escalator by asking if anyone lived on the 3rd floor. It is said that a man from Madrid apparently owns the upper floor penthouse, but is consistently away for travels, leaving the area to be vacant for the last few years. The distraction doesn't last when the Chinese woman pleads for them to check on her father, when the middle-aged woman interjects and loops back to blaming him. The Karen makes the link that because he is so sick, that he must be the root cause. When the Chinese woman tries to plead with her and them that he is sick and does not need to be alone with those monsters, the middle-aged woman attempts to show up on a racist Karen YouTube video when she does this kind of motion and says that she cannot understand her in the snarkiest tone. The Asian woman may be speaking their language in a broken manner, but not to the degree that it is not understandable. It's literally due to her ethnicity and language she is acting that way. The middle-aged woman's actions could easily cause a massive fight to break out. The fireman tries to deflate things and even make things relatable to the middle-aged woman by saying, hey, you might paint the woman's father as the reason behind all this because you said that he is said to be sick. Well, your daughter is sick too, causing her to burst out in anger, saying it's only tonsillitis, with her failing to realize what he is trying to do by making that comparison. It's not fair to make such conclusions just because someone is sick. Societal behavior aside, it cuts to the health inspection unit coming inside in a hazmat suit. Escorted in by special forces, Angela narrates their arrival arrival and loudly dictates how they are not telling them a single thing. The health unit is put face to face with the camera. The hazmat-laced person asks why a news team is inside before the camera feed is instantly shut off. Governmental forces were completely unaware of a media presence keeping visual and audio record of everything. Needless to say, it's not surprising when the next time the camcorder comes on, it's on the floor being messed with by the young Jennifer. While the hazmat officer and firemen go upstairs to inspect the dead woman, the residents and news team discuss the possibility that the living amongst them that were bitten could not only be infected and contagious, but end up attacking them in a very much similar way to how Conchita did. This conclusion would still be shrouded in mystery as Angela and Pablo retrieve the camera, clean it up, and begin to spy on the emergency service members and medical assistant resident. While they were discovered right after the camera started rolling again, the two-man media team found a crack in the window to the room they were working in to discover that they were not only quarantining the bitten police officer and firefighter in an isolated room, but they were handcuffing them to the table, prepping and then administering an unknown chemical via injection into the infected fireman, causing him to convulse, either from a reaction to the serum or whatever is afflicting him taking full control. As they prepare to secure the police officer for injection as well, the worst case scenario occurs. As the health inspector discusses the next steps with the resident, he is grabbed fiercely. The infected officer suddenly jumps from his near catatonic state to attack as the officer tries to restrain him. The officer ends up throwing one of the feral assailants to the ground. During the hysteria, the resident medical assistant is promptly grabbed and bitten in the neck by the restrained firefighter. In that moment, it was all over for him. The hazmat unit, fireman, and cop rush out and leave him inside with the stark raving lunatic. The fireman pleads to let him in, but the inspector finally spills the beans that this mind-altering virus spreads directly through saliva, and once it's been contracted, there is no cure. He plainly states that the assistant will be fine, that he might turn, but he will not be mauled to death since the other two infected were handcuffed before they made their escape. But letting the assistant in with them would not be advisable. It is here when we finally get an explanation into what was going on. This wasn't demonic possession or deadites flooding the apartment building like Evil Dead Rise. It wasn't Chinese biological warfare, but it was a virus that could rapidly transform a person depending on their blood type. A hellishly unpredictable transference time depending on your blood type depends on how fast you turn, especially when the assistant turns in those few seconds to begin smashing at the glass behind them to try and kill them. His blood typed out across the windowsill as they make their escape and close the shutter to the textile workshop behind them to keep him at bay. Seeing the true nightmare that was this infection, a person they had worked with for hours suddenly turned, and to murder them in a bloody rampage, the officer and fireman demand clarity on what is happening. The health inspector fesses up. A nearby veterinary clinic had reported a dog with an illness none of the vet staff could pinpoint. Before they could discern how each symptom it had would give them a definitive answer, the dog had slipped into a deep coma, lulling the staff into a false sense of security, thinking the canine was out of commission, before it did the same thing as the two men that just reanimated in a hurry did, attacking the vet staff in a hyper-aggressive manner as it went on a biting spree across the clinic, infecting numerous pets before it was eventually tranquilized and then put to sleep. Sounding like the telltale signs of rabies, but to such an extent that it's almost like a work of horrific fiction, to turn people and animals within hours or even minutes and even seconds of bodily fluid transmission. The irony of hearing this origin point for the disease is what we had just heard, how the young girl Jennifer had just sent her dog to a nearby vet. Her dog Max was this infected animal. The middle-aged woman was so preoccupied with saying the Chinese family were the perpetrators behind the heinous disease, yet the dog that she had taken into her home as a pet for her daughter was the catalyst. With this revelation, they turn to the mother and her daughter and realize that the high fever Jennifer is experiencing is not from tonsillitis, but most likely a bite from Max. The health inspector had tracked a chip that was in Max that came from that apartment building. All this blame being a deflection to protect her little girl, but at the same time causing an incubation of this virus right under everyone's noses. As to not allow any carriers to suddenly turn, they asked to do a blood test on Yennefer. Pulling more and more away from the emergency responders, the disease had already seized control of the child. Unaware and in denial, she does not notice her daughter turned, spitting blood directly into her eyes as she screeched and jumped to the ground to intimidate the other adults. It was widely apparent how much could change in just a second. Her vocal cords were amplified. Her skin turned a light shade of gray as she sprinted upstairs to get away from them all. Her mother attempted to run after her in complete shock and dismay. The mother, would soon be handcuffed since the virus was now actively flowing through her bloodstream. More than likely, the middle-aged woman had known. But like any story with a viral disease, there is always someone that hides a bite to be in complete denial until it blows up in their and everyone else's face. The tables had turned on her narrative, and now the innocent girl oblivious to everything, and ironically everyone that was oblivious to the only sick person in their midst, was now the main point of a secondary outbreak within the apartment complex. Ironically, calling back to the fireman when he was trying to make the mother understand how labeling a sick person like the Chinese grandfather as a threat had been foreshadowing all along when he brought up Yennefer's sickness. Further looping back, the Chinese mother saw this exchange go down and started begging for the group to bring her sick father down to the first floor, alerting the health inspector that there are indeed other people in the building that are not accounted for and right there on the first floor with them. This new development had the health inspector working fast to find everyone and neutralize each potential threat before it gets too out of control, asking for the woman to be injected with the serum from earlier while the rest go upstairs to find the Chinese grandfather. Their hunt is stopped on its heels though when they hear this. Hearkening to the idea that demons may be at play, using our bodies as vessels to create grim sounds and sights, echoing through the halls to make the hairs on our necks stand at attention. The sound is followed by an even more harrowing sight. The hallway in which Conchita was gunned down is now completely devoid of life. Not her body or that of the girl that collapsed to the floor, as if the dead had risen and wandered off to find prey. While dumbfounded at this, they turned around to see the turned Yennefer standing there without a single motion. Unlike Conchita before, she is completely still, looking like the little girl zombie at the beginning of Dawn of the Dead 2004. The same clothes, bloodstains in front of the face, but here the pupils were fully dilated with a much grayer and dirtier look with growths forming on her head. The officer attempts to prepare a needle for her in this state as she merely watches them like a ghost, stagnant in her pose until the officer looks away for just a second. Guard lowered enough for her to gnash into the flesh of his neck. Fiction mirroring reality here, almost like the scene in Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead where the husband met a similar fate, being bitten while asking for assistance in front of a visibly infected girl. The ensuing chaos has the girl make the worst squealing noises humanly possible, as if being mauled by a rabid animal that's using every ounce of lung capacity with every single shriek made. The officer knows that he is now dead to rights and yells for them to leave them behind, not sugarcoating it or hiding the fact, juxtaposed from his earlier stance of being mad at and lashing at others for being left behind, now sacrificing himself now that he has this ill-gotten injury. With the situation critical, the camera unable to stay focused amongst the turmoil and the numbers dwindling, the rest of the people attempt to flee, until a familiar, frightful sight blockades their escape. The infected Conchita is not only alive, but there like nothing ever happened, like she wasn't shot multiple times, as if she was completely fine, minus the mind-altering rabies like prion infesting her brain. Just blood on her body and in her howling madness. She doesn't immediately assault them though, just screaming in their faces as she blockades them, possibly the only remnants of her sane mind holding back her frame, and the screaming being both the horrific pain she is enduring from the disease and ammo's toll on the body, and her trying to speak as a passenger in her own body. The brief period of her faux intimidation display allows the fireman to deliver blunt force trauma to the middle of her face twice, stunning her as she crumbles to the ground, slipping into the corner, lifeless again. The virus running rampant through the apartment and these people's bodies seems to keep them nearly perpetually hostile, negating any pain threshold and instead forcing the body to shut off temporarily to regain stamina after taking any damage. In most situations, people would look to double tap this insane individual to ensure they do not come back, but the sound of other infected attacks in the building shifts their focus before they can react in any way. The residents at the bottom floor all rushing upstairs in a stampede, warning of the dangers imploding below them. The textile workshop door is being pried open by the infected as the middle-aged woman is stuck in her handcuffs with the key on the infected body of the police officer. Hitting a tipping point, there is no solution. No way to stop the infected now. The woman has no way out and is probably already long infected since blood did get in her eyes. While the fireman desperately tried to do what he was put on this earth to do, to save others, the health inspector stumbled over the cameraman multiple times trying to flee in this situation. Some may view it as cowardice, but this was out of hand. Nothing could be done. The bottom floor and the woman in the handcuffs were a lost cause. Angela tried saving her but was dragged away by the fireman. At least in this moment, he could save one life by ensuring one did not waste hers, attempting to free an unfreeable individual. A lot could be said about everyone's in-the-moment actions and reactions here. The health inspector knew the problem had broken containment and when to leave. Angela finally breaks her role as a commentator to try and free the biased woman despite knowing she is handcuffed with no key, with her focusing on saving this one person more so than anyone beforehand. The fireman desperately tried by himself to keep the shutter door closed despite being outmanned, and at least saved the newswoman who consistently got in his way before, each of them with varying levels of personal severity and intellect in these kinds of situations. They make their way into the older man's apartment and hold the door while they collect their bearings, reeling over the fact that the infected are eating people alive, that no one will be coming to save them now that the unknown virus is overwhelmingly consuming the apartment population. Angela even screams that they are all dead with no word or hand coming their way. The older man says they still have a chance of the authorities outside the building coming in to save them since the inspector is still there and alive, saying that he is in the bathroom. The fireman assumed he was hiding in there due to fear. The inspector, however, reveals that he had been bitten in the previous skirmish and the biological clock for him was ticking. He was quarantining himself within the quarantine of another quarantine, asking for the door to the bathroom to be locked and even informing them that in his violent state that the rickety gate door would not hold him back for long. The inspector, who seemingly ran away in fear at a loss of control, was actually bitten during the first floor attack and rushed to an isolated area to barricade himself from others. The health hazard well known and taking precautions even with his own body, cornered in the old man's apartment with a front door and gate that could break down at any moment. The camera crew, fireman, and old man are the last ones left. The old man approaches the window illuminated by searchlights to plead for help at least one more time, yet is met with immediate megaphone speak. The outside crews stating if they do not back away from the window that they will be met with hostile consequences. Stuck in a rock and a hard place, to be bitten and or ripped apart by the very man sent in there to save everyone, to have the front door break open and have a horde of infected maul them and devour them to death, or to be gunned down through a window by those sworn to protect them. Well within the realm of dire straits, the old man does come to a conclusion. Apparently, an underground storage base basement underneath the textile workshop that can get them into the sewers, saying the medical assistant had the keys in his room. New information that would have been invaluable to have before the first time they ventured into the workshop for an escape route, but better late than never. Before they can inquire more about his knowledge of the workshop's layout, the gate's glass breaks open to have the infected inspector grab the old man's head. In moments, the inspector bites into his skull, blood spilling out. He too would be of the horde soon enough. One has to wonder why he would stay so close to an opening where it was known that a freshly bitten individual was gestating the virus. Even if he didn't know the inspector was bitten, the fireman would have advised him to step away from the gate, especially if he is informing them of the only means of escape as the last living resident that knows anything about the layout of this building. Knowing the old man would soon turn, the fireman has the news crew evacuate the apartment since it was now compromised. Heading out back into the fray of the stairwell, they only see the middle-aged woman's restrained corpse at the bottom floor. The sounds of infected echoing through the chambers as they whisper their next move, until they start yelling at each other, loudly declaring that they can check the mailboxes for the name of the dead assistant. The chatter attracts the attention of the Chinese father, who comes barreling down the stairs. Nearly biting the fireman, he is able to muster enough strength through adrenaline to snap his neck and kill him instantly. A strategy not conceived of until now, but it does buy them whatever so much time before more of them come. Rushing downstairs to the mailboxes, they find out that his room is on the 3rd floor in room 2. Basically, in the heart of the outbreak where more infected are congregating at. They are given another obstacle in the form of the turned middle-aged woman shackled to the stairs, having to slink their way past her only for the Chinese mother to corner them at the top of the stairs. Two conflicting people from earlier are now working together as mindless zombies, now forcing the cameraman to also finally go beyond holding just the camera to help the fireman in killing the Chinese mother, putting the camera down so they can strangle her and snap her neck, her lifeless body thudding to the floor. The pandemonium has Angela believing she was bitten by the woman on the stairwell, the fireman saying she was fine, but the paranoia of just a simple wound meaning death is too much for her mind to bear. She keeps thinking she was bit. It is then that the lights in the complex go completely out. Whether it be by the forces outside or a power shortage, it's unknown, but it leaves them in the dark to only have the spotlight of the camera as their way to see anything. The camera that was proving to be in the way at almost every single turn was now their only light in the darkness. Literally. However, it only highlights an infected right in Pablo's face in a feral frenzy. The fireman quickly held it back and proceeded to smash its head in with a mallet off screen. The sound of it caving the infected's head in, almost causing a ringing sensation to reverberate throughout the building, akin to when someone experiences a traumatic explosion, rendering them weak and weary as they try and bring themselves together. They make their way into the assistant's abode to find the keys. Pablo sits back and just records Angela desperately searching for them, using the light to help her, but soaking back into the role of spectator so quickly. They eventually find a drawer full of keys and are forced to grab them all. They go back outside to discover that the fireman is gone, and when they look downstairs to see where he had went off to, he was now fully infected as well, possibly bitten during one of his many encounters grappling the infected. Most likely bitten when Angela thought herself was bitten, but he was passing the buck. Having been mad at the inspector for running off when he thought he was just running in fear, the fireman had been bitten and hiding this fact. This shot by Pablo of the many infected in each story of the stairwell as they are running upwards is daunting. The officer, the fireman, the assistant, everyone from before was now gone and replaced by these bloody, rage-filled, mindless beasts. Screams from the hellish vertigo below them, spinning into another reality as they are forced to go into the unoccupied penthouse at the top floor mentioned by the residents before. Narrowly getting inside before the swarm floods in, they turn the light of the camera on to find out the dark secrets of this apartment building. The man from Madrid used this place as one of research and more so obsession. Hundreds of pictures of a girl adorned the walls. Vials and beakers cluttered the tables. Religious fixtures and imagery scattered everywhere. What stuck out the most was an article on the possession of a Portuguese girl that the Vatican was actively looking into. Tons of news articles were ripped and stuck to the walls. detailing this girl and her supposed possession by demonic entities. It was clear that this unknown man of Madrid was using this penthouse to find answers, to discover what was going on inside the body of this girl. Religious institutions had come to their ultimate conclusion that the girl was possessed by demonic entities, evidenced by her animalistic demeanor, violent tendencies, and ability to survive outside the normal realms of man. The case would have been buried and left alone as such if not for the man in the penthouse having taken her from the Vatican and held her in the penthouse to conduct studies on her, knowing it was way more than the simple answer of demons controlling her body. He knew it was a virus that could become much worse, restraining her to run tests in the hopes of making a vaccine in case it ever got out, having a precaution against a potential pandemic. However, in his research, he found out an enzyme of the disease was resistant to most forms of medicine. Through his findings, he also discovered that the same enzymes were also mutating at an alarming rate to cause further hostility, infectiousness, and resistance in any mammal it infected. Mirroring the common flu in its spreadability, the man from Madrid had to abandon hope of making a vaccine. This was a lost cause. Contacting the Vatican, he swore to kill her and eradicate every single trace of her, to keep the story of her relegated to a possession so no one would find out about her and her fatal and contagious pathogen. The reason the penthouse's resident never came back from Spain's capital was to make the residence into a holding chamber, sealing the actual patient zero of the possessed girl within until Vatican officials could come and clean the earth of this pestilence. Judgment Day for the child, and in turn for the place holding him. This origin point being underneath everyone's noses until it festered long enough to become a biological nightmare. One man, in good faith, both in science and in God, had hoped to find a way to stop the virus by keeping it secretly held, but having no luck as he inadvertently allowed it to mutate more and more. He may have had all the best intentions for the good of his fellow man, but as the old proverb goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Revelations of information in God ending when a hatch to the attic suddenly swings open. Pablo goes up to look to see about a possible way out of the building, when the infected girl attacks them, screeching and grabbing Pablo in a moment. The fact that this infected child was still alive revealed so much in so little time, not having to need any food or water or energy input and still surviving for months, as if the girl was dead or inhuman. It was no wonder she was thought to be possessed. This was not hasty and willful ignorance. It was the only conclusion that so many could come to for such an unknown thing to bear witness to. The camera is knocked out of his hand, breaking their only source of light, having to use the camera's night vision as their only way of fumbling around in the pitch dark of night. Seeing the child in an extremely emaciated state and how she is now walking around silently at the other end of the penthouse, the toll on the body after months and an undisclosed amount of time is making this like a nightmare. The infected girl wielding a hammer, but just as blind as them in this darkness. She has no clothes, a shriveled body, hair barely on her head from lack of nutrition, the neck fused with the chin, limbs dangling as if barely attached to the frame of her body, but still looking to kill and or infect. With the shots of this night vision, it looked like something out of a Russian sleep experiment. While they tried to sneak their way past her, the sudden dropping of a random object makes enough noise that has her begin chasing them, squealing like a rabid bat hitting such a high pitch. She starts wailing random objects with her hammer and shoving things around until eventually she finds Pablo, battering him to death with the hammer hellaciously. He would drop to the ground dead. His role as spectator was over, so now the camera reflects his lifelessness. Angela can only sit back and find the camera to see her friend and colleague being devoured in the dark by this young girl. The sound of Angela's cries and this camera being shined in her face disturbed her first meal in ages, so the possessed child attacks Angela and drags her into the void. Angela's voice silenced in her own echoes as the record of what happened ended there at that moment. As the night went on, it was clear a virus had broken out from the start. But the deeper things got, the more the virus infested people's minds, and the story of how it all came together, originally being thought of from the Chinese family's diet to a dog coming from the vet, and now the story of a possessed child from the Vatican, it made you wonder if this truly was a disease, or that of hell's attempt at coming to Earth. The Vatican was already working to destroy the history of the possessed girl to not cause a panic of either religious or scientific origins to explode and cause hysteria through the public. What it truly was did not matter, as it was harbored and eventually buried by men of science and faith. And the events of this night in a Barcelona apartment building would have followed in the same manner if it were not for this discovered recording. All the victims may be dead or long infected, but their stories will live on in the hopes of exposing the nightmare that could be. For those unaware, this video is a review of the 2007 movie Wreck, following in line with my previous review and analysis of the mockumentaries Savage Land and The Bay. I wanted to discuss narrative significance in the story. What was most interesting about how this was created was the fact that the actors themselves were at times completely unaware of what was happening next, where the directors and cameramen knew about the next scene, but the actors reacted realistically to almost everything that transpired within the apartments, adding to the grittiness of the found footage medium. The idea of intersecting religion and illness worked well, especially within the corridors of Spain, a predominantly Catholic country, to make the infected or possibly even zombies act and turn the way they did felt realistic to real-world disease, and extensions of rabies-inspired beings like the infected from 28 Days Later and other movies and shows. That and being in the claustrophobic environment of the apartments, especially when the lights went out while people were trying to figure out everything, and being closed in by governmental forces, made it so much more suspenseful. Many people in my Savage Land and The Bay review assumed I was either reporting about this as a real cover-up or spewing fake news lies. I just like talking about good movies that make you feel like a death spree was believably being recorded. But I wanted to present this as a real thing because 1, I needed the clicks, and 2, it just makes it seem more interesting, especially if you've never seen the movie. I highly recommend watching it for yourself because me rambling over it doesn't do it justice. Also, don't be a Facebook boomer believing the thumbnail for this video and commenting without reading or watching, and enjoy the subject of the movies that were recorded. But you know what? There's still going to be somebody commenting down below saying, wow, is this real? I want you to just kindly tell them to watch until the end. That about wraps up this look into the movie Wreck. What do you think? Is there something I missed or should have explained more? Let me know down below and what you want to see next. Make sure to support the channel by contributing to me on Patreon as a patron or becoming a YouTube channel member to be featured on this list already scrolling by right now on the screen. And if you donate on my Patreon, you can see my videos up to a week earlier than anyone else. Until next time, I'm Zach S, aka Wow Such Gaming. Never forget to stay happy, stay healthy, stay sane, and most importantly, stay wow.